many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance, just one chance, to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom?
Welcome to Anti-Tyranny News Radio here on UCY.TV. Thank you for joining me this evening. Excuse me for my absence these past couple broadcasts. My grandmother did pass away Thanksgiving morning, so I've been absent for that reason. But I am back, and I'm moving on. One thing I want to bring up first in this broadcast is something that hasn't really been covered by the mainstream media that much. Most places, if any, but if it has been covered, it hasn't been covered in the best of light. And it's usually a local, it's not a national covering this. First story on this I'm going to cover. Examiner.com. Oath keepers reject orders, refuse to stand down. Remain on Ferguson rooftops. Members of Oath Keepers, a national group that includes current and retired military and law enforcement personnel, have rejected orders from St. Louis County Police to abandon posts on top of private businesses that invited their protection. The St. Louis Post-Dispatch reported Monday the order to stand down was issued under presumed authority of a county ordinance prohibiting unlicensed security personnel. Once we read the statute, we laughed at it. Local Oath Keepers leader Sam Andrews commented, explained the ordinance applies to employed security personnel. Then the next night we were there. They committed presence of Oath Keepers could renew confrontation dangers, as group founder Stuart Rhodes had earlier cited a report of members being targeted, presumably by a federal law enforcement sniper team. Per Rhodes, such teams had not communicated with local law enforcement, let alone coordinated activities with them. Confirming the Post-Dispatch report is an update from Rhodes sent to members and supporters Wednesday, explaining that contrary to some reports, the group did not abandon their posts. The alert also included a letter from an Oath Keeper's attorney. Said here, as retired police officer, Missouri Police Academy instructor John Kerriman said, we will not and did not stop protecting the buildings and people we had promised to protect, Rhodes insisted. We We're there the very next night after being told to stop, and we have been there every night since, and we will continue to be there until calm is restored and we are no longer needed. A review of the applicable statutes and regulations makes clear that the Oath Keepers do not fall under the provisions of St. Louis County Code as suggested by your officer's attorney Matthew H. Hearn advised St. Louis County Police Chief John Belmer to assert that the property owners of Ferguson do not have the right to invite the Oath Keepers to assist them would be tantamount to telling an individual that they do not have the right to assist a neighbor in need. Additionally, the property owners and the Oath Keepers have numerous other rights guaranteed by the United States Constitution, including the right to freely assemble, which may not be restricted by any county ordinance or state statute. And I'm not going to read the rest of that. It's at examiner.com. Ben Swan actually got a chance to sit down with Sam Andrews, and he's the head of the Ferguson Oath Keepers operation up there. He's the one that organized it. And I want to play this clip of the interview with him. And you can find that at benswan.com. The article's exclusive interview, Oath Keepers surrounded by 50 police told to stop defending building in Ferguson from fires. And I really commend these people because they really have showed up and defended people. Defending them from looters and rioters and people trying to burn down buildings, and standing up to federal, state, and local law enforcement when they are unjust in what they're doing. Oath Keepers have done this time and time, and you might not like their tactics. Okay, you don't like their tactics, but they have been more successful at protecting individuals and their property than law enforcement. And you have the government robbing you of taxes to pay for it. So who do you want to really be mad at? Oath Keepers or maybe the government? And these people are protecting others. So I'm going to play this clip here.
Hey there guys, Ben Swan here. So welcome to the Disrupt podcast. This week, a really interesting story for you. I'm actually standing right now in a business in Ferguson, Missouri. It's a business that is still standing despite the best efforts of some of the people who were attempting to burn down different businesses here. As you know, dozens and dozens of businesses have been burned down already, but not the one that I'm standing in right now. And over here is actually plywood and a busted out window. Today we're going to be talking with Sam from Oath Keepers, who helped to organize a group of Oath Keepers for the sole purpose of protecting businesses here in this area, and they've done an amazing job. It's really an amazing story, not only what they've been able to accomplish, but also what they've had to stand up against, as they have really had to battle against the federal government and against many of the higher-ups of the local government and police forces in the area who do not want Oath Keepers here. Podcast is brought to you by one of our brand new sponsors at benswan.com, Infidel Body Armor. These guys make, bar none, without question, the very best top-of-the-line body armor anywhere in the world. So go check out their website, infidelbodyarmor.com, and take a look at what these guys are doing. As I said, it is the standard. They're the very best at what they're doing. I will tell you that here in Ferguson, I have my own set of Infidel body armor that I've taken with me, because this is really about finding the very best in terms of protection. So I want to encourage you, check out their website over at Infidel Body Armor, and if you use the promo code LIBERTY, you get 10% off. So I want to encourage you to check them out. Again, Infidel Body Armor, great sponsor for BenSwan.com. Now to the interview with Sam from Oath Keepers. Tell me about with you, the first interaction. Your wife said, you need to see this woman.
Okay, so I went and saw Natalie, and she was in tears, and I gave her a big hug, and I said, we're going to try and do something about this. We're going to try and keep this from happening again. And she said, thank you so much. And I went out, and I talked to Sue, who owns the beauty supply place. They threw a Molotov cocktail through the front window of her business, and she has one of the most beautiful retail facilities I've ever seen. And I walked inside, and she was standing in 4 inches of water with charred, burnt things all around her, and her face was in her hands, and she was sobbing. And I guess the Molotov cocktail had set off the sprinkler system, and it had flooded her business. And she was so upset, and I walked up to her, and I gave her a big hug. And I said, Sue, I'm Sam, I'm from Oath Keepers, and, we're going to put together a team of guys and try and keep this from happening. She just cried on my shoulder for about 3 minutes. And then we walked outside and told her what we were going to do, and that I just needed to get permission from the building owner, and we would be a go. But in the meantime, my guys would be boarding up her windows and cleaning up this broken glass and seeing if we could help her in any other way. We got a consensus from the business owners and then the owner of the building, and so at that point I decided to put together an operation, a volunteer operation to help these people. And so I started calling my friends in the military and the police departments and National Guard and firemen and communications experts, and said, we need to put together a team and go up and help these people defend their businesses. And I got an incredible response from probably over 400 people. And I selected the number that I wanted that had the highest qualifications. And we've been up here without problems, at least with the protesters or the criminals.
Now, you did have some people throw a couple of firebombs up on top of the roof.
Absolutely, we had people, but we had a plan for that. We had buckets of water up there, and we had fuel fire extinguishers, and so my guys would just pick up the firebombs with their gloves on and throw them in the bucket of water and extinguish them.
So this strip of buildings, 4 buildings?
2 buildings.
2 buildings.
6 businesses.
6 businesses and 2 buildings.
Yeah.
Did come under physical fire at different points since last Monday, and those were, these almost sound like cliches, but those were fires you guys put out.
Well, absolutely. It wasn't much of a threat for us because we were ready for it.
As opposed to literally dozens of other businesses that were either not ready or not protected.
We had businesses just yards to the north of us burning. We had businesses to the south of us burning, but not our buildings.
I'm going to ask you a difficult question here, and so how you respond to it, entirely up to you. Watching last Monday when this community exploded, you had a governor that had declared a state of emergency, had already deployed National Guard, and yet Monday night, 8 p.m. Ferguson time, the sun's gone down, it's dark out, they've given people hours to prepare for this grand jury decision to be announced. The decision is announced, and they knew it would cause this eruption here in the community, and yet the National Guard were not here protecting businesses.
That's the truth on the first night. The storyline, the truth, the facts, is that they had over 2 months to prepare for this. Why the National Guard was not here supporting the St. Louis County Police and supporting the Highway Patrol and protecting these businesses, to me, is either such a grotesque incompetence or downright criminal negligence, and I'll let the courts decide. I'm sure there'll be enough lawsuits over that. I don't need to comment on it.
When you saw that happening, though, and you all came specifically to the defense of this this business owner. And in media, they immediately want to paint this picture, right? That you all are a militia, which is untrue. I want you to address that. You're not a militia.
Absolutely not.
You are a bunch of gun-toting rednecks who are here to further push the narrative of black versus white. Comment on that.
Absolutely not true. There's no racist here, and I wouldn't tolerate that for a second.
This was about protecting business owners, not attacking people.
Absolutely true. We are only here to protect the people, and we also have people living in apartments above these businesses. So for this particular block of buildings, arson is a lethal threat because there's people living upstairs.
People who are African American?
At least one.
So this was not about, again, and clearly, as media paints this picture, they're painting some other narrative than what's actually happening here. Had you all been able to, in advance of this decision, bring out, because Oath Keepers is a very large organization, bring out many more times the number of Oath Keepers, do you believe you all could have protected even more businesses and more people in this community?
Oh, absolutely. You know, the last half of the past week, we've been getting multiple requests to defend other businesses. And I've tried to get as many quality resources in the area as I can, and we're guarding about as much as we have manpower right now. But if we weren't being harassed by the police, then we would be able to guard many more businesses.
No, okay, let's talk about this police harassment, because my understanding from what you've told me is that you all are no longer allowed to patrol up on the rooftop. Is that correct? And why is that?
Well, they don't control this rooftop. They think they do. But they're unconstitutionally claiming they have the power to deny us from being on the roof. And they don't. We were on the roof last night. We'll probably be on the roof this night if the threat level climbs. Okay? But that's not what we're about. It's not about being on the roof or not being on the roof. It's about people's rights. And we are allowed as Americans to carry arms, to defend ourselves, to defend our friends, to defend our homes, to defend our businesses. And these unconstitutional chiefs like Chief Belmer have absolutely no right to tell us we can't defend ourselves, our homes, or our businesses. And they do it with taxing regulations and licenses. And unfortunately for them, we're doing this for free. We're not being paid, so we can't be regulated.
Right, so let's talk about that for a minute, because they're claiming that you guys, by being on the roof, would be considered a security force?
A security operation is how they termed it to me.
What does that mean, a security operation? So you're basically security guards because you're on the roof?
Well, that's what they're claiming. But if you read the statute, and English words still mean what they mean, it clearly says if you are employed by a corporation as a security personnel, and there's 3 or 4 different descriptions of different types of security personnel, they all have the word employed in it because they have to. You can't regulate volunteers. But if you read the statute, it all says employment, and we don't meet the standard of the statute, and they have no right to regulate us, and they have no right to keep us off the building or help people for free. That's insane. Who would want to do that anyway? What sane person would deny free help to their own people that they just let burn?
So that's the next question, and I think it may be a question you might not even be able to answer. Why is the St. Louis County Police Department, the Ferguson Police Department, the National Guard, why are they treating this community with such disregard, do you think?
Well, I think you need to be very careful when you answer that question, because I've been in an overwatch position with extremely high-quality optics, and from those high spots, I see almost everything in my area. And what I've seen, by and large, is the rank and file, the lieutenants, the sergeants, the lower-level police officers doing a phenomenal job. Now, that was up until Thursday night. And then we started having problems. And the problems don't come from the lower-level policemen. The problem comes from the upper-level management and unified command. And what I believe is happening is I believe the federal government is involved, and they're using St. Louis County as frontmen, and they're squeezing Chief Belmer to order his men to do unconstitutional things. And I've been told that by a number of police officers.
Define unconstitutional things.
Well, on Thursday night, they surrounded our building with over 50 men and told us to get off the roof and put our arms down, or they would arrest us. And they said they had to ID us. And I said, you have no right to ID us. We're not committing a crime. We're actually providing a volunteer service. So you have no probable cause or reasonable suspicion. And it's ridiculous that you would think that you did. And you know better. But these guys, they won't stand up to the chief. And Chief Belmer's more than willing to not stand up to the federal direction he's being given and the direction from the Highway Patrol and Governor Nixon. So they continue to threaten us. They continue to tell us we can't be on the roof, we can't do this, we can't do that. And we just kind of snicker and laugh and say, maybe you guys ought to read the Constitution. Maybe you ought to read your security ordinance that you quoted the other night, because once our attorneys read it, they laughed hysterically.
There's also a report. Stuart Rhodes, when he first contacted me about this whole story, had mentioned that there was a three-man sniper team that was set up on a rooftop nearby. Can you tell me about that?
No, we weren't on a rooftop. When we set up a position on a roof, of course you do counter surveillance, because you want to know if anyone is set up on you or is setting up on your position. And so I had a young Marine that spotted 3 guys going into a building carrying heavy black nylon bags with long arms in it. And we watched them set up positions in the window of the building. And, of course, we wound up having them point their rifles at us. And so I called 911 and asked them to tell Unified Command that please communicate with your team. They look like a federal team, but please communicate with them and tell them we're friendlies in this location. I gave them the address and the positions on the rooftop in a professional way. So please ask them not to point the rifles at us. We're friendlies.
And what was the response?
Okay, thank you. I sure will. Very professional. And the next thing you know, there's St. Louis County police cars coming into the parking lot, and a sergeant jumps out and says, show me where the snipers are, what building? And I said, relax a little bit. They're probably feds. They look like feds, and they set up a hide like a federally trained police agency. In other words, not very skilled. And I pointed to the building. He said, we don't have a team there. And I said, well, relax. It's probably the feds, and they just didn't communicate. Okay, and then it got a little sillier from there. But.
And were you ever able to get any explanation as to who it was, and in fact confirm it was a federal team?
Well, I think they talked to command for a while, and then the guy came back over to us, and he said, oh yeah, my wife knows the lady that lives there, and it's a barbecue place, and I think you saw her sons carrying big black barbecue pots. And then, of course, my Marine steps up and says, really? 3 tours of duty, and you don't think I can tell the difference between a nylon bag carrying rifles and black barbecue pots? And so I simply said, they were backlit when they walked on the porch. It's really humid out. Our lenses are a little foggy. Perhaps it was people carrying barbecue pots. And he said, yeah, I think that's what it was. And I said, okay, great. And as we got down off the building, I said, hey, Lieutenant, would you do me a favor? And he said, sure. I said, would you have your wife call this woman and ask her sons to stop pointing their barbecue pots at us? So that's kind of where we left it. Now, when we got on the ground, of course, the rank and file county officers are high-fiving us and fist-pumping us, saying, great job, we hate those guys, we don't want them here. They don't communicate well with us, they don't work well with us, and we're glad you busted our position.
Last thing I'd ask you before we head out, and I want you to show me around a little bit. So Oath Keepers is you're in a difficult position because you have clearly a federal apparatus that does not like you all. They do not like what you're doing. The higher-ups seem to have a lot of disdain, even for the organization that is Oath Keepers.
Sure.
And yet you have people all over the country who have lost faith in these National Guard units, federal law enforcement, even local law enforcement. I mean, I think this city is a great example of people having lost faith in those organizations to serve and protect them.
Well, it's really important to distinguish between those different parties you talked about, because they're vastly different. Okay, the National Guard that's here, these are local Midwestern state assets. And these people do a great job. They do exactly what they're told, and they do it very professionally. We've only had one issue with National Guard since we've been here. And the county police rank and file do an excellent job. And the unfortunate thing there is their management orders them to do unconstitutional things. The problem is when the federal assets get involved and they start driving political decisions down the command chain, it causes enormous consternation. The local police, Ferguson Police, I have seen very fantastic, friendly people doing a very professional job, and I've been in a great position to watch them in action over the last week. And so the real problem was when Governor Nixon took St. Louis County Command out of control initially months ago and put the Highway Patrol in control, and then Pandora's box opened at that point, and the poor community here has been trying to recover ever since. And so each party, some are much more culpable than others in this situation as far as the damage that's been done and the lack of accountability to people.
Last question I'd ask you here is, what do you want people to know about your team, about yourself, about Oath Keepers, and about your mission here?
Well, our mission here is very, very clear. It's to protect these businesses from lethal force, from being burnt out of their businesses. It's very simple. But what I want everyone to know is that these false accusations by the media about being militia, about being anti-government, every single person I've had here works for the government. We love our country. We love our jobs. We love the people in this country of all races. And what Oath Keepers is about, it's about having everyone, rich, poor, black, white, Native American, Asian, you name it, every single human being having equal rights, being protected by our Bill of Rights and our Constitution. There's no hatred here. There's nothing but love. And we've enjoyed being here. We've enjoyed interfacing with people, yelling and screaming KKK at us, and smiling at them and saying, "We love you, man. We're here to protect your rights." And watching them melt. That's been one of the most rewarding things about being here. And having the business owners pat us on the back and say thank you. You know, that's just wonderful. But most importantly, what needs to happen is people in this country need to wake up. They need to have the federal government get out of their daily lives. Ferguson needs to send the federal government packing. Send them home. Let the Ferguson Police and the St. Louis County Police handle this, and let the community heal. Stop letting the federal government and the new Black Panther Party and the communist agitators divide the people in this community. I grew up here. We should be smarter than that. We need to send them home, all of these groups that have evil intent, and go back to the community healing and bringing themselves together.
That was from benswan.com. That was Oath Keepers, and they've been up there. They've actually defended private businesses by locals. No discrimination. Not like a lot of the haters out there talk about, oh, they're Oath Keepers. They're a racist group. No, those were, black business owners. They weren't white people. Not only that, like he said, there's apartments above the businesses too. There's families that live there. And they were the ones that were there with buckets of water, putting out fires, preventing the cocktails from burning down the business, protected those businesses. And when you look at, during all of this, who are the ones that were in charge? It wasn't the Ferguson police. They were not in charge during all these riots. It was the state police backed up by National Guard, which stood by and watched everything burn. And it's sad that, we are relying on these outside groups, but it also shows how government is getting in the way of protecting individuals and their property. You have all of these outside agitators in there, and there are people that were trying to protest peacefully. They wanted, justice, as they called it, which I don't think, I've seen enough evidence to convict Darren Wilson. But that also goes back to what the police are. These are not peace officers. I heard a group of older women, and they were talking, and they were like, well, the peace officers, and I was just like, I really haven't heard anybody say that term other than describing what we had and what we don't have anymore. But it threw me back because the older generation had peace officers. Your little, sheriff would keep the peace in the town. And, this was a group of ladies that were in their mid and late 80s. And, it reminds me of, we don't have peace officers anymore. We have law enforcement. And the Supreme Court ruled that law enforcement is under no obligation to protect you or to defend you. What we have now is not what was intended, and it's been manipulated. And let's say there is a crime with the whole Michael Brown thing. Okay, that might have not been, shows unprofessional law enforcement, a corrupt law enforcement. What Oath Keepers was saying there was they did not see Ferguson officers, engaging in anything that was bad during those protests. That is what they were saying. They're not going to say that, well, that means that they're not corrupt at all and they don't have the potential to cover something. They're not saying that. That's not what they're saying. They're saying what they observed while they were there protecting those businesses is that the local Ferguson cops did not act in a bad manner, that what they seen was the feds acting in a corrupt and bad way. So don't confuse the two. And when it comes to these agitators that are coming in from outside, I basically already came to the conclusion a while back that these were people that were also involved with the organizing, portion of the Occupy, the ones that were setting up the, everybody repeat what I say type meetings, that socialist type meeting, that collective, sound like everybody was zombies, and the phrases that they were yelling going down the street. And like I said, the people that were showing up at Ferguson, some of them have been spotted in New York. Some of them have been spotted in Chicago, stirring up stuff there, which I am all for what went down, the protesting against what went down in New York. He was selling loose. Really? This is what we are allowing cops to forcibly take people down and kill. Well, it was his fault because he was fat. Well, you seen he was fat. And he wasn't harming anyone. He was selling loose cigarettes. Oh, you didn't get your little, 10-cent tax. Get over it. That does not warrant what happened. And that's the issue. But when I'm sitting here watching these protests and I'm hearing the same chants that I heard during Occupy, the same people have been spotted there, Ferguson. These same groups are linked with Soros. It makes me come to the conclusion that this is all being steered. That's my personal opinion on what I've seen. Maybe not. Maybe I'm just, people pick up on those phrases and they adopt them, and that's why you hear them. Because they go, hey, we're protesting, these are what we heard protesters yell, so we're going to yell the same thing. Whose streets are streets? Whose streets are streets? I don't know. But my personal opinion is that these are being controlled. And even though they're being controlled, there are people that are aware. There are people out there that are not buying into race baiting. They're not buying into the steering. And those people are out there protesting, and they are going to probably, by most media outlets, try to be lumped into the majority. You're going to have the left socialist type people that I believe are steering these protests, lumping those other people in to show their numbers. And then you're going to have the other side of the spectrum lumping them in with the socialists to try to make them look crazy. Because we know that the so-called libertarian outlets, some of them out there that are more just a Republican controlled opposition, will go be like, see these crazy people, they're against police. No, we're against militarization of police. At the same time, those outlets will talk about it, but in other circumstances, and try to justify these ones just because. Who do you see? You see the same people with the same chants. And that's how it's going to be viewed. That's how the mainstream media divides people. And they don't make those, observations clear to their listeners or watchers, their viewers. It's one of those things that, if you look at it, there's multiple different people out there that have different views on these issues. And you're going to have some that are trying to race bait everything. And that's why you're seeing those cases in the mainstream media is race baiting. But there are people that are legitimately out there trying to speak up against the police state. It does happen to quite a few African American, black people, Asian people, Hispanics, when they're in minority communities and low, maybe poverty communities. Then we also do see racism, and we see it in all directions. That's why it's important to not focus on whether it's racism or it's just police brutality. It comes down to it's a police state. People's rights are being abridged. We had a Revolutionary War, this whole tax stamp and everything. We have a guy that died from a chokehold by a law enforcement officer because he was selling loose cigarettes that did not have a New York tax stamp. Let's make that difference. That's why he died. well, he was not following the law. Well, when the law is unjust and not warranted, really, it it's just the government wanting a cut, a share of the money. That doesn't warrant that type of action. And we continue to see the same old thing year after year, and it keeps growing. You know, it's so crazy to listen to stories, you know, that my dad told me about him and his buddies hunting, and, you know, they're hunting stories, and, you know, I've sat down with him and some of his old friends. One that passed away in the middle of the summer. But listening to them, and, you know, they would toss their shotguns over their shoulder and go walking down the road. No problem. They could walk down the road with the shotguns, you know, right over their shoulder. No problem. Cop drive by. No issue. And still outside of the city, in that same county, you couldn't get away with that just because of passerbyers. I know within that county, a lot of the rural area, the more wealthy people are buying up all the property up there, and they're, you know, a lot of these hunters are kind of getting surrounded, their property surrounded by additions with, you know, $1 million homes in them. Now they can't even hunt their own property, so then they sell that, so, you know, more homes go up. And I know exactly why, because, well, they don't want to live inside the city limits, but it's a never-ending thing there where the city just waits for them to build everything up and then annexes them. Then they slowly start moving farther out. And the city annexes them. And it's just sad to watch because it doesn't really accomplish anything. That's why I believe that county, the sheriff and the county council, I think are very corrupt and are allowing all that to happen. That's why I live where I live, not there. Okay, moving on. I had another one from Ben Swan. And it was about the Ferguson thing, and I've heard this too, and I've kind of had discussions with people about it, trying to explain to them, and some of them kind of come to understanding. Then other ones, let me find it here. Give me a second here. We'll have to go to... But it's about the whole looting. Well, these people are outraged, and they're rightfully outraged, so they have the right to go protest and riot and loot. And it's, what? Are these people serious? And yeah, they are pretty serious. These people believe that, and it's amazing to me that people could think of that, but then believe that they then have a right to their property not being vandalized and their rights abridged. You have to look at it. That's why I say a lot of this has to do with outside agitators. And that's why I really warn people that are out at these other protests that they really, really need to be careful with who they're marching beside. And if you are seeing that maybe these are getting a little out of hand, that these people might have ill intent, you need to break off from them. Let them be the ones that are caught on camera in the group vandalizing things. Don't let it be you. And that's you taking your stand against the violence. That's you taking your stand against all the corruption. And then call out any other corruption that you see because, these people might not be getting arrested, which we've seen that. We've seen where they just let it happen. They watch it happen. And I'm trying to find this clip here. Hopefully I can find it. Hopefully it's not missing. There's one with Ben Swan. I've seen a whole bunch of private videos in the playlist. I'm wondering if it got switched to private. Hopefully not. Let me check out benswan.com here. Maybe it'll be there. Okay, here we go. Oh, it says playlist too, so we'll see what happens here. Hopefully this works, guys. Sorry. I'm almost thinking that maybe the video got blocked. Now, of course, I have everything wanting to freeze up. Okay, let me skip through this. I'm thinking it might have got removed. I'm thinking it did get removed. I don't know why it would. Yeah, I'm not finding it. I'm thinking it got removed. Maybe I can find it somewhere else. But Ben Swan was in Ferguson, and he debated a protester who says violence in the form of burning private businesses is a legitimate form of protest. And it was, I watched it, and I'm not even seeing it in my history, but my history also um, seems to have a lot of things missing. I don't know what just happened. Just typed it into YouTube and it kind of popped up like it was getting ready to show it, and then other things popped up instead. That was kind of weird. That was actually really weird. Huh. It like showed me the playlist and the video real quick, and then it disappeared. Search engine or search results just completely changed all of a sudden. And it says it's in this one playlist, and I looked through the whole thing and it's gone. And you know, someone mentioned something in the chat that we've all committed a felony. They do say that we all commit a felony. You know, you've had people actually come out and say that we've all committed felonies. Really, everybody could be put in jail for something. We all could be locked away, and then they put legislation in that they don't even have to charge us with anything. So what does it even matter? Does that not further the violence? Does that not encourage the whole thing where you have you have these people that will just burn stuff? You know, I'm a criminal anyways. What does it matter if I burn down someone's building? Well, I guess when you start treating society as criminals, they might become criminals. Have we ever really looked at it maybe that way? And, you know, with the Michael Brown case, okay, there's a chance. I'm not going to completely rule out that there was any corruption in that. But how many cases have we seen in, maybe the past year that should have, you know, brought protests? Why don't we see anything about that? That right there is kind of interesting. That we don't see anything about that. I'm kind of starting to get upset because I'm not finding that clip. It's just surprising. Sure, disappointing I can't find that clip. I might have found it now. We'll find out if this is the right one. Okay, yeah, this is the right one. It's titled Ferguson Residents Torn Over Property Destruction. And, excuse me. And it's one of those things that there's no justification for it in my mind. There's absolutely none. It doesn't help anything out. But there's a lot of people that say it's justified. And again, if you start treating society as criminals, then they, in turn, usually will become criminals. Because if they're going to be treated like it, might as well commit it. That's how they look at it. I personally don't believe that. I personally have a set of morals for myself that I try to adhere to as much as possible. Even how I speak and respond to people. Because it's one of those things I believe if you want to make the place, the world a better place, you have to be the change you want to see. Therefore, I try to do that. But I'm going to play this clip here.
Standing here in Ferguson just a little over a week after this city erupted, it's hard to take in the magnitude of the destruction here. It's really pretty incredible. We're going to show you around to some of the images here, but I got to tell you, watching it on TV or online really doesn't do it justice as compared to actually being here on the scene. But we'll show you around anyways. Over here you have the auto parts, O'Reilly Auto Parts. This building, a very large, almost warehouse-sized building, as you can see, not just burned, but collapsed in on itself. Across the street, the same story at the Title Max Title Loans. This building completely gutted by fire. And by the way, that is the reality of almost every one of these buildings that we've seen. They weren't just burned, they weren't just damaged. They were, as I said, gutted by fire. The buildings are a total loss. This Advanced Auto Parts, you've probably seen the video of that. It's one of the more famous images of the buildings that were burning on Monday night. And then behind me here, this Fashions Boutique. As you can see, again, this building, a total loss. At this point, there's clearly no official estimate on what the damage cost, but it's safe to say we're talking about somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars. Having said all of that, there is still a larger question that remains. Was the destruction of property, private property, really a valid form of protest? And this has been debated in media. Monday night, I had the chance to talk with a young activist about this very issue, and she made the case that destruction of buildings like this one is a valid form of protest, even a necessary one at times, in order for people to be able to make their voices heard. I challenged her on that idea, specifically to this idea, that the owners of these businesses did not harm Mike Brown. They were not connected to Darren Wilson. They had nothing to do with that particular incident. So if that's the case, and this is a legitimate form of protest, why not, instead of destroying private property, go after the brand new police station in Ferguson, the brand new fire department? Wouldn't that be a valid form of protest if violence were really the answer? Here's that debate.
You can't stop everybody from righteously acting in their anger. You can't.
But some of the anger is unfair or unfairly pointed toward business owners who had nothing to do with Darren Wilson or Mike Brown. Nobody burned the police station. They burned businesses. There was talk they were going to burn the police station.
Yeah.
But nobody burned. At the end of the day, nobody burned it. So is that a cop-out for folks to say, we're angry, let's burn the police station? They didn't even touch the police station, and they go after tire shops and they go after a Walgreens.
I don't think it's a cop-out. I don't think it's a cop-out at all. I think what you're seeing is, I think what you're seeing is a tipping point. I think what you're seeing is so many people upset that, that people have stood by and expected all of this violence. They expected it. They brought it up, months before. That it's like antagonizing. It's a small form of antagonizing. People were angry.
Just clarify that. You're saying it was antagonistic to board up windows?
I think it was antagonistic to board up windows, and before there was even a verdict, the people were just.
But they weren't wrong, because even after there was a decision to not indict, there were windows broken.
I think they were wrong because, like I was telling business owners when I was sitting down with them, the violence that you're going to see is going to come when the police come with their excessive force. And when they started shooting tear gas down our streets and things like that, people started running away and windows started to be broken. People were pissed.
Then why not go after the cops? Why not go after those people if that's where the righteous anger is, instead of into the businesses? Last word on that.
What you're seeing is a community mourning. I can't explain why people went and busted out windows down the street instead of busting windows at the police station. What I can tell you is that people acted on their anger, and people were acting on their anger that an 18-year-old boy was unarmed and he was murdered. And I can't explain why they didn't attack the police or why they haven't been why they're running from the police and running towards these businesses. I can't.
Yeah, we don't have answers to that question either. But what I can tell you is that being here in Ferguson and talking with business owners here, it's not clear to them either why some businesses were targeted and others were not. At the end of the day, we do know this, that this community at some point has to begin to heal and has to begin to come together. How that happens, especially among business owners and the community, how that happens between law enforcement and the community still remains to be seen. From Ferguson, Ben Swan, RT.
Okay, now, when we look at all this, this is a society that is hitting a tipping point. She was right about that. But wrongfully directed tipping point, when that tipping point truly tips, if you are not knowledgeable in, you know, where the forces are that are causing all this, when you don't understand what's behind it, that there truly is people out there to control you, and a lot of what you engage in plays right into their game. So you have to really be aware of everything. And there's going to be those people that won't. They will not accept the truth. And those are the people you have to be prepared for. And for that reason, her argument falls. You can be extremely angry. You can be, pitchfork angry. But if you're going after and harming the wrong people, where your anger shouldn't be directed, if you believe that Michael Brown didn't attack Darren Wilson, that he was running away, I don't believe there's enough facts to prove that. But let's say that's what happened. Burning down, a tire shop is not going to help anything. Burning down your community where you'll need to do business in is not going to help anything. And again, we know where a lot of these people came from that engaged in a lot of it and provoked a lot of it. And the locals that engaged in it are going to probably end up paying the repercussions because, well, those were businesses that locals owned and worked at. They're not going to forget that. And that's why I said there's a danger, definitely, New York, Chicago, wherever you're protesting at, that if you're protesting, you're next to the people that are doing all this, you potentially are going to be, guilty by association, as the justice system would probably put it. And that is dangerous to you. That's why when I see protests like these going on, I'm not going to go, hey, I support the protest in New York City because he shouldn't have been chokehold for selling loose cigarettes. I'm going to say I support the outrage over the justification for using that chokehold and eventually killing him. I will support the peaceful protests. I will support the call for people to step down. But if you go breaking out the windows of some stores that have nothing to do with it, I'm not supporting that. Therefore, I don't support any protests in whole. I support certain actions that certain people take in those protests. And those aren't the actions of the people that burnt down, the O'Reilly Auto Parts place. Or any of the other local businesses, the beauty boutiques and beauty shops and all the other businesses. And, it's a good thing that, Oath Keepers was able to protect some of those local businesses. And you can see photos, they're right there with the business owners, protecting private property, private businesses that people in the community own and work at, and there were apartments above it too. And they were attacked, and they put out any fires that started and made sure no damage was done. They protected people. So, you can hate on who you want, but I think you'd be hating on the wrong people and misdirecting your anger, because we got a lot bigger issues than Oath Keepers protecting private businesses. Or when they were out helping out at the Bundy Ranch protecting Bundy. When they see trouble and see people in need, they've helped out. And they are a pretty wide range of people out there. Oath Keepers, there's a lot of them out there. Retired, currently serving, and others. Okay, I have one here I wanted to play. I'm going to kind of switch modes here, because something that we all been kind of happy about, and we really shouldn't be too happy, but low gas prices. Actually, Ford gas for once. But, we already understand what this is about, and this is, this has to deal with Russia, and this has to deal with Saudi Arabia and everything going on, whether it be the Middle East or Russia and Ukraine and Russia and China and the currency wars. There's a lot going on right now, and there was one from AMTV. And it's oil price drop signals global depression. And global depression, and what was it? Here, let me bring it up here. And World War III. And I found this one kind of interesting. And I think we are in almost a silent Cold War going on right now. It's not the widely used Cold War. And when we look at this and we see what's been going on with Russia, the whole oil wars, but is this not really pushing Russia, and China closer together? I just seen a report out that Russia is now top of the global economy, or I forget exactly how it was worded, but basically they're not doing too bad. And we already know that this currency war, that's part of why the oil prices are dropping. They're trying to artificially bring the price of the dollar back, or the value of the dollar back up by lowering the oil prices, because that's kind of the standard. But it really comes down to Saudi Arabia not scaling back, and I'm sure there's some type of agreement, probably has to do with trying to topple Syria. But I'm going to play this here, and this has Christopher Green of AMTV, and here's his opinion on why the oil prices are dropping, the global depression in World War III.
Hey everybody, I'm Christopher Green. You're tuning into AMTV, Alternative Media Television. It is, of course, December 3rd, 2014 on a Wednesday. And I did a report a couple days ago on the real reason oil and gas prices are dropping across the globe. And I explained that really what this is a hit against Russia, U.S. and Western interests to destabilize the Russian government, also put pressure on Iran and their nuclear program, more than it has to do with Saudi Arabia choosing not to cut production in order to stabilize prices and, put fracturing companies here in the United States out of business. Although there might be some truth to that, it's not the real reason, it's not the real geopolitical play, and it's not the real chess move. And something that I wanted to touch on today that some of you probably picked up on, but I forgot to mention, and something that I've looked at specifically since 2008, is that I find it extremely interesting and also strategic that since 2008, the U.S. has increased its production supply of oil by a gigantic 50%. This is a result of the astounding shale oil and gas revolution. Of course, I've spoken about at length this fracturing and horizontal drilling that we're seeing in states like Texas. But we've had this massive strategic increase in production, a gigantic move of 50% since 2008. Isn't it interesting that the U.S. suddenly comes out of nowhere and decides to be a major producer of oil post the 2008 financial collapse? At the same time, they managed to steal trillions and trillions of dollars from the American people in the form of bailouts, in the form of these very aggressive market moves that, of course, put many people on the street. Many people lost their businesses, lost their homes in foreclosure, short sale, etc. And also production in states like Texas doubled in a matter of just a few years. In 6 years, oil production in states like Oklahoma, Texas, and North Dakota doubled. That's absolutely incredible. Now, this report I'm reading here says without this energy blitz, the U.S. economy would barely have recovered from the recession of 2008-09. From the beginning of 2008 through the end of 2013, the oil and gas extraction industry created more than 100,000 jobs, while the overall job market shrank by 970,000. So here we are, several years post the 2008 collapse. We've gone from a nation that was dependent on OPEC and largely the Middle East for oil, one of the reasons we've been militarily involved in countries like Iraq, for example, to becoming the largest producer in the world, larger than Saudi Arabia in just a few years starting in 2008, namely due to these new ways of fracturing oil and gas in states like Texas. It also has created a tremendous amount of jobs. And now we have the price per barrel of oil dropping to really record lows, at least in recent years, what we've seen in recent years, with the price of oil up close to $200 a barrel leading up to the 2008-2009 crash. Taking a look at the oil markets today, we have Brent crude trading at 70, which is an indicator of more geopolitical risk and more specifically looks at OPEC producing nations. And then, of course, we have the Western Texas Intermediate crude, which is a little bit more U.S. dependent, and that's trading at around $67 a barrel. Now, of course, I've talked about how there's break-even points, not just for fracturing companies here in the United States, but for countries. And economists will tell you that under $100 a barrel of oil, places like Iran and Russia, is disastrous for their economies. And under what we're seeing today, under $80 a barrel, $70 a barrel. I've read reports saying we could go as low as the 40s, maybe even the 30s temporarily. And a Saudi Arabian official today said that they think it's going to stabilize around $60 a barrel, even if it drops further in the short run, is catastrophic for countries like Russia and Iran that just happen to be enemies of the United States. You see, all of this, of course, is strategic. This is a part of the geopolitical chess move, and it isn't an accident, nor is it a coincidence, nor is it aimed to help consumers here in the United States, although we could argue that Americans will, at least temporarily, benefit from this. But what pundits aren't really expressing, and I don't think are focusing enough on, are the extreme geopolitical risks as a result of this. The ruble, for example, has lost, I've read, up to 60% of its value, the Russian ruble, against the U.S. dollar in just the past year or so as a result of very heavy economic sanctions on Russia. We've had similar events transpire with the Rial and Iran. Both of these countries arguably, if not in recessions, in depressions as a result. And expectations for inflation in Russia, for example, in the double digits next year. And also, they revised GDP from 0 in 2015 to a negative print, to a negative number. So not only are prices falling, but inflation is rising and their currency is weakening as a result of these U.S. economic sanctions and this price pressure revolving around oil. Now, the problem with this is, if oil drops below $100 a barrel, where it is today, if it drops below, 80, and then we're trading here in the 70s or even lower, this makes it impossible for countries like Russia and Iran to subsidize their economy and also their people. They can no longer subsidize energy. They can no longer subsidize housing. They can no longer subsidize food. And I've read some reports on this. The Russian economy, for example, is so heavily dependent, as well as OPEC producing nations and countries like Iran, are so dependent on oil in terms of growing their economy and allowing their governments to subsidize their people and their economy, that this is truly a catastrophic environment for America's enemies. And this, of course, is an act of war. And we always see economic acts of war largely before we see physical acts of war. And what's not being highlighted by the pundits, in my opinion, is that Russia, Iran, and U.S. enemies, China, also a friend of Russia, are going to respond to this. They are going to retaliate. Just like if the United States had economic sanctions put on them by these, what they would call rogue nations, the U.S. would respond, likely with war. So while there is a trade-off of Americans maybe filling up their trucks, their cars with cheaper gas and maybe some short-term savings, what they're not seeing is that likely this is to move to a full-blown engagement in physical conflict in the not-too-distant future as Russia and these countries, other countries like Iran, enemies of the United States, will react in tandem, likely together. And I'm sure they're meeting on this right now on how they will respond to this. One thing that Putin could do, for example, is escalate tensions in the Ukraine. Of course, the United States has launched a massive propaganda campaign in the region and has basically convinced the American people that Putin has invaded Ukraine, even though that's the exact opposite of the reality. U.S. interests overthrew the Yanukovych government not too long ago through a coup, a U.S.-led coup. We've seen the same thing happen in the Middle East with the Arab Spring protests, the revolution and re-revolution in places like Egypt, for example. And the same thing was just done in Ukraine via the proxy of U.S. interests, of course, because they want their hands on natural gas exports. Gazprom, one of the large Russian companies that provide, I believe, somewhere up to 20 to almost 30% of natural gas exports to the European Union. You see how all this works, how all the money is funneled and how it's all connected, why the U.S. had a self-interest to overthrow the Yanukovych government into a more friendly, Western-backed government, which is exactly what's happened and is since why they've ramped up the propaganda war. And I always find it funny how you'll always read reports in the mainstream media, in the boob tube, places like CNBC, about how Russia has these large propaganda machines that make up their national media. Yet people believe, they're somehow convinced that we don't have the same propaganda machine here in the United States of America today. Of course, we know that that is not true. But to me, I think this signals a global depression, not just here in the States, but around the world. It's one of the reasons why oil prices have been manipulated lower, and specifically U.S. interests and the West are fighting an economic war at the moment against their enemies, Russia and also Iran, namely. And, of course, this is also why the president has amped up the wars. Remember, he said he was going to withdraw from, but he's actually reinvading and starting brand new ones in places like Iraq and Syria, where with his increased bombings, soon-to-be authorization of even more ground troops. See how he's no different than George W. Bush, but arguably much, much more dangerous. So please continue to watch oil prices. Again, this is a very large macro move. What I've explained today is the real reason why oil prices are dropping, why gas prices are dropping at the pump. In my opinion, has nothing to do with just simple supply and demand. Although that has been, and there has been some influence with this increased fracturing and production in the States. But all of this is much more connected to the New World Order strategy. Steal all the money in 2008, 2009, create and orchestrate the collapse. Once all of that money has funneled to the upper echelon of our society, the top 0.01% bankers that, again, created the problem, orchestrated the mess, engineered the securitization instruments, the phony bullshit mortgages in the first place. After that was done, they strategically go into the fracturing business. In 2008, we double our oil output in just a few years. Creates most of the jobs in an economy that is arguably in a depression here in the United States of America. And now we have OPEC deciding not to cut supplies, to continue to drive oil prices lower. And the question you need to ask is why? And the reason why is to put pressure on Russia to fight an economic war against Vladimir Putin. Of course, this has all been a part of the propaganda war, whether it's Edward Snowden in the leaks of this illegal wiretapping via the NSA from Edward Snowden, or it's oil prices. All this to put pressure on Putin, his government, Iran, the Ayatollahs, and our enemies and countries that we are currently still invading, like Iraq. This is all a part of the program, and it will lead to physical war, not just economic war. And I fear, as has been the historical track record of the United States, typically peaks and troughs mark times. Anytime there's a trough, that is usually stimulative for the economy. That usually precedes an economic expansion, and when prices are high in the oil markets, it typically precedes a recessionary period, a recessionary trough, and or a depression, like what we've seen in, for example, most recently in 2008 and 2009. But what I think is not just different this time, but really is just more of the same, is this will lead to another global war. Just like we had World War I, just like we had World War II, and I believe we're already engaged in World War III, and we are living through the brushstrokes of the economic war right now, this geopolitical war, chess game being fought via Western nations against enemies like Russia and Iran, and countries like Iraq, for example. And of course, all this tension around Ukraine will soon lead to the next great war and the next great conflict. So if I were you, as I am doing myself, I would intently be following oil prices. I actually think that it's going to surprise many people, surprise economists. I think it shoots much lower before it stabilizes into the 60s, as a Saudi representative mentioned today. I think we could see oil go much, much lower in the short run before we see stabilization. And it will be, mark my words, catastrophic for countries like Russia and Iran. And they will react. They will respond, just like the United States would if the rules were reversed. Again, all of this a part of the plan, all of this a part of the engineered strategy to integrate the global economy into one economy, into one global nation state. As we lose our autonomy, Obama opens up the borders, authorizes up to 5 million new illegals here in the United States, anti-constitutionally, an act of a king. All of this is about destroying our borders and integrating nations into a cohesive unit. Kind of like what we saw with the European Union, which is a perfect example of a failed integration that has failed miserably in just a few short years. I think the European Union has only been around for, less than 10 years, something around that ballpark, and it's already literally disintegrated in a depression in this part of the world. And, it's just a little bit of a taste of what you can expect as we move forward into 2015. I'm Christopher Green. Get this video out everywhere. Make it viral. Hard hitting it in your face. And click the link below.
AMTV on YouTube, Christopher Green. And I agree with them on many points. And it really does come down, I think, to the North American Union. I think it does come down to this globalization. The EU is not doing well. But you still see it standing. There's been protests in Greece, there's been protests in Germany, there's been protests in the UK, and all it seems to do is bolster. And if you remember the riots not too long, maybe a year and a half ago, it could even be 2 years now, but the protests that happened over in, I think it was London, and they were rioting, and they were throwing Molotov cocktails at businesses that had apartments above them. There was protests, I forget if it was London, Paris, or where it was. They were throwing Molotov cocktails at law enforcement. We tend to see the same actions being taken by all of these groups. And it's to bolster government. And with what Obama's been doing, what our government's been doing for a long while, has been working us to this point where you're going to see, well, we already heard Eric Holder thinks that the UN trumps U.S. sovereignty. So we know where these type of people stand. You probably see the UN talking about, how maybe the police and government are not handling the Ferguson thing right, or these other cases, which they're not, but then they also stand down and let businesses burn. You see all this happening. He's right. It's to push closer to that North American Union. Then guess what happens when we have that? Well, then eventually we'll have the Western Union type thing where it'll be what they consider the Western cultures. There'll be one group. It'll be the EU and the AU combined. Then you'll probably have Russia and China and some Asian countries. You'll probably have the Middle East with their Ottoman Empire. So you're going to have all these empires growing. And you're going to have South America, I think, will end up turning something else. Their goal is to one day have a global government that will oversee everything. And they'll use every crisis and every opportunity to do that. Now, to go along with that, as long as all this loads right, which it probably won't. I had an article that I had to close last time my browser started freezing up. That kind of went along with that whole story and the whole globalization and things they're doing to move us towards that. And I think the whole riots, the looting, all of that is really really the ones that are going to help push us towards that. I can't find it now. Okay. I'm definitely not finding it now. But it was talking about the economy. And basically how we're working up to another bubble. We are working on another bubble. And I think that's true. I think we're seeing an artificial inflation of the market, the stock market. You know, the situation for the people out there is not really getting better. They kept trying to tell people it was, convince people it was, but it didn't get better for those people. But you know what did happen is it came out when you look at Black Friday. Sales are down. And that's hard denying that, well, sales are going down pretty quick. People just don't have the money, even on Black Friday, to go buy these expensive products. You still see it happen. You still see, but it's definitely not like what we've seen in previous years. People are like, well, it's because we buy stuff online. I don't even think that's it. Because really, the best deals I've seen were the ones on Black Friday at the stores. And then that was only a couple things at each place. The rest of them were rip-offs. And you're always kind of getting something that's getting ready to be replaced by a newer version anyways. When you do get those good deals, they're only a good deal because, well, a couple months a newer one will be out. And we're just trying to get these off our shelves. So, really, people aren't buying into it. They don't have the money to buy into it. They have really no choice. And I wish I could find that article. It's just not coming up. messed up too, doesn't help. Well, I think We Are Change put something out about the economy, and that might kind of talk about some of the points the article I had talked about. Let me see how much time I got. I got probably enough time for the one I've seen from We Are Change. And We Are Change puts out a lot of good content. They have a lot of the riots in New York. Covers a lot of that. Luke does live streams a lot, so definitely check that out. But this really talks about what it's titled, how we are being lied to about the economy, and I think this plays into the whole the fake market and oil prices and everything going on. This is a deliberate manipulation to try to collapse America, I believe. At least collapse it enough that American Union can be formed. But let me go ahead and cue this up here.
Sending subliminal messages focused on depriving your soul of any humanity, of selling your existence to the corporate overlords, at stuffing your face with GMO foods not to face reality, and buying corporate-made slave goods so you can never be consumed with anything relevant or important in life. They're also telling you how the U.S. economy is great. Now, my question is, how can the U.S. economy be improving? How can the U.S. economy be growing? How can the U.S. economy be resilient and picking up speed, as these top 4 articles claim, when the U.S. is in debt close to almost $18 trillion? You don't see that in the headlines. So in this video, we're going to talk about U.S. economic manipulation, not only nationally, but also internationally, and how it affects the whole world. A very important article in the backstory, is not on the front pages, of course, is how the U.S. actually dropped out of the 10 most economically freest countries recently. U.S. economic freedom is slipping away with dire consequences. And why is that? Many people point to the fact that the super uber elite, the super 0.001% richest people, pretty much have government socialism, and everyone else lives under a plutocracy. There's a reason Monsanto gets paid to plant GMO corn. There's a reason Exxon and other huge mega corporations don't pay any taxes, because it's a government run by the private interests. And when we're talking about rich, we're not talking about your average Joe Schmo. We're talking about David Rockefeller, Lord Jacob Rothschild, Bill Gates. We're talking about the top of the top. We're looking at also the employment numbers. A lot of people in the mainstream media are saying unemployment is at a record all-time low. Well, if you actually look at the employment stats, if you look at 2000 right before 9/11, if you look at 2008 right before the housing market crash, these numbers are nothing compared to what they were before. But yet, mainstream media and other analysts are saying we're almost back to full-time employment, and that unemployment is at a record low. It is going up, but it is not at the level that it was before. A lot of other people between the ages of 16 and 54 are not in the workforce. Now, even if you are in the workforce, you are still feeling pressure, because your average hourly wage has also gone down from 2010 to 2013. Now, it does look like there may be a small spike between private sector jobs, but it's still minimal compared to the drop that happened all the way from 2008, 2010, all the way to where we are now, if you look at these key numbers. But it's also not also the economy here that's being manipulated. It's also being manipulated globally, internationally. Just 2 weeks ago, we made a video talking about how Saudi Arabia and the U.S. cut a deal to overproduce oil. That's why we're having really cheap oil all over the world. And they did this so they could screw over Iran, Syria, and Russia. And now, 2 weeks after that, we're seeing the effects of record low gas prices, and we're seeing the Russian ruble, the Russian currency, plunge to a new record low. And this is after OPEC declared that they're still going to be producing more oil. A lot of people in the media claim that this is going to hurt the U.S. shale producing companies, but many people don't understand it's going to hurt the competitors, not the major producers of shale in the U.S. It will eliminate competition and make the super rich companies like Exxon even more powerful than they are now. But that's a whole other side topic to get into. But we're seeing the economic effects of secret deals that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia cut in September to lower gas prices. We're seeing that effect on Russia. Russia, in effect, is also putting back that economic pressure on Ukraine. Ukraine is in a very tough position right now. It's facing a very dark and frigid winter, and Russia cut off its coal to Ukraine recently without warning. Now, Ukraine has an aging energy infrastructure. Half of the coal that it used to produce is closed because of the railroads and because of the mines being closed because of the war that has been happening there. Now, Russia in this position is obviously upset with the West, is obviously upset with Ukraine making moves geopolitically against it. But this is something that we haven't been hearing in the media as well, is that all Russia is saying is that Ukraine needs to pay its debt, needs to pay what it owes Russia for the gas that it bought earlier, and that bill is up to billions of dollars. Ukraine owes Russia billions of dollars in past due gas bills that they haven't paid for. Russia just clearly said, you pay the gas, you pay us up front for the gas, we will give you gas. Ukraine has not done so, even though there was an agreement recently between Kiev and Moscow where they agreed, and Ukraine has yet to pay Russia up front for their gas, and they have yet to gain gas. But now coal has been abruptly cut to Ukraine, another energy source, and again, with the aging energy infrastructure in Ukraine, it's really creating a horrible economic situation in that country. Ukraine is actually struggling to pay its elderly, it's struggling to pay people's pensions, and people are having a very hard time surviving there. We look at the situation even deeper. We look at the inflation and soaring prices that are also happening in Ukraine. And again, Ukrainian president is calling an inflation war against the country. Ukraine faced 19.8% of the inflation rate recently, and within the last year, its currency was devalued 48%, which means importing important things like energy, gas, fruit, medicine, food, everything has increased tremendously, causing a lot of economic pressure on Ukraine, which many people point to Russia being responsible for, especially by hurting the energy infrastructure. It looks like the U.S. is making a punch against Russia. Russia is retaliating against Ukraine, and it's just continuing back and forth. And I think that's why Poroshenko, the current selected president of Ukraine, is calling and screaming that war is possible, World War III is possible with Russia. I think he's only doing that to try to get more aid and more loans from Western-backed countries. We see this not reported in U.S. publications. We see this reported in international publications. But it seems like he is exaggerating the threat of war against Russia to be able to get more support from the West, which seems to have just left him in a very horrible situation. The situation in Ukraine shows you when a country is being pulled back and forth between the West and the East, between Russia and the U.S. and the European Union. They were just left and totally screwed over. The people are suffering. Now, of course, the Ukrainian establishment, even the Ukrainian president, they all have ties to the U.S. Even a WikiLeaks cable came out recently showing how Poroshenko was actually an informant to the U.S. You can actually take a look in this WikiLeaks document. In the description below, we're going to have all these documents listed for you. Check out this video where we talked about how cheap the oil is and why it is. It's also in the description below. But as we're seeing the economy, what's pretty much happening is people in power are screwing over their own people, and they're using other countries as a way to manipulate and push and to fight back against more manipulation. Everything is based on a bubble. Everything is being manipulated economically. People are suffering, and no one's paying attention to the details. If you thought this video was helpful, don't forget to click the like button. Subscribe. We're going to have a lot more content on this channel, and definitely check out wearechange.org where we update the site every
wearechange.org. That was Luke Radowski. We Are Change on YouTube. How we are being lied to about the economy, and it highlights some of what Christopher Green highlighted, and it's highlighted something that I've talked about. And let me give you this one example. Let me point out something that has come after World War One. Something that came out of World War II. What came after World War One? We had the League of Nations. What came after World War II? We had the United Nations. What do you think will come up after World War III if we have a World War III? Which I believe eventually we will. Every time we have had one, we've had a stronger world government created in its midst. In the rubble of these great wars, we've had these organizations pop up claiming authority over others. And this has been the attempt by the globalists. One thing they're having a problem with is here in America, even through all the chaos and everything they can throw at us, I think a lot of it is contrived. Everything that they've thrown at us, and we're still not willing to give up our rights, our guns, definitely. Well, they are looking for a solution to what they believe is the problem, and that's you being an individual, you being a independent person. And the only way I think they have a solution for that would be to, create a world war again and create a even stronger United Nations organization. Because, the other ones weren't strong enough. They couldn't prevent the wars. So we need a stronger one. The American Union, the EU, just like the EU, the AU is not going to have a true representative body, and they will report to a central United Nations type organization. I think that's what would come out of World War III. when you look at where we are now, the whole world is basically at chaos. There doesn't seem to be too many calm spots. And when we see this happening, we see the manipulators gain control and do awful things. And I think that we are coming to a tipping point, and unless people make themselves aware of the wrong path, the wrong people to associate with, the wrong groups to associate with, the people that are out there to stir up chaos, to gain control, basically to be one of the puppets of the new masters, and they will get to live lavish. We're going to see a new world born that will not favor the individual. And they have the technology, they have the science to be able to control the population. And you know, I remember reading The Giver when I was in school. When I read the Giver, I could imagine everything I was reading, and when I seen that they put it in the movie form and it came out on Amazon Instant or whatever, I went on there and rented it and watched it, and the movie definitely was a good movie. And the sad thing is, I see society heading that direction. Be puppets to and be ignorant, and somehow it'll be a better society, but it becomes a society that is stagnant. Everything is prepared for them. Everything is, you know, you won't be exposed to violence. You won't understand, you know, hate and all that. It's just, it's manipulation of reality. It's a fallacy to believe that they can create this utopia that will forever grow. But I think the elitists know, but they want the control. And just like societies in history, when you keep the masses dumbed down, then you become God because you know how to make the water flow. You know how to, you know the science, you understand things. And anybody that tries to rise up to that will be struck down. You know, there's a lot of times there's been things that have been used to manipulate the masses to persecute and sometimes even execute people that were too knowledgeable. You know, sometimes because they were exploring new ideas and new things and they were expanding their mind. They were called witches. Or they were called Satanists. Or, you know, there's always been kind of a thing that went against science. And there is justification sometimes, because science isn't always fact. When the basis of science isn't completely understood and they only have theories to explain what they believe is the roots of a lot of what the science is based off of, then it can't always be 100%. And there's always that little missing bit that we don't understand. So science sometimes can be justifiably looked down on and at times because it's not perfect. There's things that science has proven and then has proven wrong. And we as a species need that independence instead of that collective. We need a dream, and then make our dreams possible to explore new ideas and new things. But they rather keep the knowledge to themselves because then you're easier to control. You depend on them. A dependent society. And if we do go into some type of World War III, if we do get this new world government, what can come out of it is a society that we're not allowed to grow as people. That we become pawns and puppets in their game, if we already aren't. But we do have some ability to live free. And there's people that have went off the grid and disappeared. There are people that live in the mountains. That homestead still. There's still little pockets. There's still people that choose to just live free and use technology. In New Hampshire, you have a lot of these libertarians, voluntarists, constitutionalists, liberty lovers that they do believe in civil disobedience. Civil disobedience has made it where people in other states can legally smoke marijuana if they choose. But I always warn with things like that. It's your choice to do it, but when you legalize it, you actually put it under their control. When they decriminalize it, they only want to decriminalize, up to an ounce. Anything more than that, you'll get in trouble, and then people can't, grow it, sell it, and all that. And that's to legalize it. That way, if you do something like that, they can tax it and tax it to death, where the black market still has possibilities. That's the thing. It's not about, smoking marijuana. It's not all about that. If that's what it's about for you, okay, whatever. This has nothing to do with about that for me. It has the whole thing about the whole black market and the violence. I think cocaine, heroin, all that should be legalized because the black market is a worse place. It creates more crime. That doesn't mean I'm going to go out and do heroin because it's legalized. Hell no. None of those drugs. But it should be legalized. That way, the black market is not creating a criminal enterprise out of it. Thank you all for tuning in. Stay tuned here on UCY.TV for Character Matters with Dr. George Simmons coming up next. Take care. Have a great weekend.
Come on.